Welcome back as we're getting ready for our next series of the day between Black Mamba and Pixel. We've seen a lot of Black Mamba previously in Season 1 here at Zyronic, and as we mentioned at on the other side of the break, they've revamped their DPS roster, and execution has been a very big issue for them.
It's the same story with Black Mamba. Even though they've changed their roster up a bit, they kind of have that same problem we see with Abracadabra. Like, they're kind of the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde group. They have like really good dungeon runs where you're like, wow, this could be the second or third best team in the region. And then they have runs like we just saw on that Motherload where they just kind of don't play well the entire dungeon. So hopefully we're seeing more of the good, Black Mamba this week.
Yeah, especially since they've kind of had more opportunities to grow together as a team. So their points did end up resetting in the standings starting this season here, Teto. So they're rebuilding that, and they're getting themselves ready. And we also have Borealis to start us off.
Yeah, so with Team D potentially not playing this week and potentially not playing next week, Black Mamba needs to be getting a lot of points. They need to probably be getting first place both weeks for them to even be in a position to even get to BlizzCon.
That is some automatic math you have there, Tettles. We have that prepared?
Check it.
Fortified Bursting Volcanic going to start us off in Borealis. So, Nagura, we've talked about how big the spotter is ad nauseum all the time. Spotter games, how we're playing with them, setting them up. We've seen a lot of interesting double spotter plays as well. What are we looking at in particular for getting those setups done cleanly, efficiently? What needs to be done?
I think, we're just going to look at the spotters because of the bursting and the fortified. It needs to be handled even better, right? Because not only do you have to deal with the mobs itself, you also have to be worried about the bursting after you kill the mobs. So that's definitely the one thing that we have to look out between those two teams.
Alrighty, as we're getting our poll results in Pixel with that 64%. As we're getting ourselves started, no love for Black Mamba onto that one. But no worry, we'll see how they do and how Pixel does as we're getting ourselves ready for game number 1 in Siege Borealis.
Yeah, so Pixel, as far as I'm aware, they're going to have a very interesting comp, and we'll see.
Hey! There it is. They answered my birthday wish. Like, we're bringing the Disc Priest in. I'm excited to see it.
Okay, so let's see what the Disc Priest can do on Pixel sides. Well, Black Mamba is playing more of this traditional comp that we've seen from them in the past, where they have the DK and the Devil Rogue. But yeah, they have a Disc Priest, they have a Havoc Demon Hunter, they have a DK, so very interesting comp coming out of Pixel. They only have one Battle Rest on the side of their DK, but that's alright, right? So we have 2 Battle Rests on Black Mamba and 1 Battle Rest on a DK on Pixel.
It's also important to mention that Pixel opted to play Alliance instead of Horde, but they just jumped down to the Horde side anyways. So there must be some reason they're playing Alliance. They must be using that Shadow Meld for something here, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. They do a pretty weird pull. We don't normally see teams pull what they're pulling at all. Looking at that vote, I think Twitch chat is kind of memeing a little bit. I don't think they really think Pixel's going to win this. I think Black Mamba.
You don't believe in Pixel?
I don't.
Wow.
I don't believe in Pixel. Those are some class. That's a class we don't see for a reason in the MDI. But hey, if they can pull it off, I'd be impressed, to be honest with them. But I personally think Black Mamba's going to take this. They do, however, have to commit their battle res to that very first trash pull. But to be honest, we see a lot of teams wiping to that first trash pull before the first boss here.
Yeah. So one thing about Disc Priest. That Jack probably is going to talk about it later as well. But as far as I'm aware, Disc Priests are just not very well at dealing with some affixes. Mainly Grievous and Bursting, as far as I'm aware. Just because Bursting applies onto the raid or onto the group once the mobs are dead. And the Priest needs the mobs alive to help him out with the healing effects that he does. You can see one of their damage dealers actually going down here, and Disc Priest using Pain Step on himself just so he can stay alive, while Komi struggles to stay alive as well. Now, Black Mamba, on the other hand, they did get their 9% trash, and they're already fighting the boss, but they also had 1 death and had to commit their battle rest.
Yep, and the thing is, the DK died. He is their battle rest, so there's no way of him getting back to the group unless he releases and comes back. And unfortunately, the Disc Priest also goes down. He's going to have to release and run back to the group as well, so not the greatest start to the dungeon for Pixel. Black Mamba is already taking a pretty commanding lead in the dungeon. They're almost halfway done with the first boss. One less committed. Their healer goes down. They don't have a battle res, but that being said, residual damage on this fight is not that big of a deal as long as the marksmen are CC'd and both the rogues could commit their blinds. However, they are not CC'd, so they're going to be taking a lot of damage from those marksmen. They'll have to actually cleave them down if they want a chance of completing this fight, I feel like, and you can see the tank going in to deal with those marksmen. So they're going to be cleaving the marksmen down. It's going to take them a little bit of extra time to finish this boss, and it's going to be a little dangerous for them as well, but they should be able to get it down.
Yeah, thankfully this time around we have fortified and not tyrannical on this boss, so they have a better chance of finishing off this boss without their healer. But you can see everyone drop pretty low. They did focused the ads down. So nice heads-up play by Black Mamba, realizing that their healer is dead and they have to finish off the marksman because they were, I assume they were dotted, they were too close to the boss for them to see them. And the next marksman that just spawned was blinded immediately from a rogue to make sure that the Molten Slug is interrupted. No, someone actually broke the Molten Slug and the CC, unfortunately. But we have the AMS and we have both of the cloaks available for the rogues, so they definitely should be fine to finish it off at this point.
Not to mention, correct me if I'm mistaken, you know, and if there is a time to make something up, it's right now. But the Druid also has the Raise Ally debuff from the DK, which even I'm pretty sure he can't be res by the DK again while he has that debuff, right? So even if they had the battle res, I mean, I could be completely making that up, but
I think you're making it up, but I'm not sure.
I don't. You know what? That's something I'm willing to take for the team there. But yeah, Black Mamba taking down the first boss, even without the healer, it's something they can do pretty easily. The Druid did proc his Undulating Tides coming back, and he died again, so a little unfortunate from them there as well. So hopefully he can make it back to the team. But yeah, Black Mamba, I mean, as long as they have to have seen, you know, the time trial times. They have to know what Pixel's capable of as a team, and I would guess that they're probably going to try to play safe in this dungeon. They're probably not going to go for the double spotter strat we saw from the faster teams in the Western Cup last weekend. I mean, they could probably go for just a very safe key and they'll still win the dungeon. I'd have to imagine.
Yeah, most definitely. But to be honest, like spotter strategies are something that we've seen on live keys as well. Maybe not like double spotter shenanigans or something like that, but the spotter is definitely getting used for those live keys, especially if you do really high keys in Siege as well. So if you're used to those live key strats and you haven't had enough time to adapt to the MDI speedrun strats, then I think you're still gonna be alright in Siege. Of course, you know, if you do double spotter strategies like we've seen from the Western region in the past, then you're still going to be faster. But maybe the safer strategies is going to pay off, but they're not actually doing the safer strategies as they already have 6 deaths on the board, and unfortunately their disc freeze is going down again. So they don't have any battle rests available. They have to just release and run back. And yeah, 6 deaths on the board for Pixel, while Black Mamba also has 3. But they, oh yeah, Black Mamba is actually behind in trash because of the boss difference, because Pixel still has the boss to kill.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of typically what you see from the Alliance side, and it's the strategy we saw from the Spring LAN in Sydney earlier this year, where the teams opted to choose Alliance because they got a lot of trash before the first boss. Sometimes they were getting up to 40 or 50% trash percentage before they killed the first boss. But teams have kind of opted to use the spotter as a faster strategy after the LAN, so that's why we see most of the top-end teams on the west side playing Horde, so they can, you know, get access to more trash after the first boss. So to see Pixel have a lot more percentage before the first boss, that's just kind of what the Alliance advantage is. That's why we see them going for that much trash percentage.
Yeah, then we'll have to see what they do later on with their Shadow Melt, because that's why they chose to be Alliance, right? To have the Shadow Melt, I assume, because in general, Siege of course is different depending on what faction you're playing on. So Alliance does have not only a different starting point, but you also have different mobs, and some bosses have different mechanics as well. So you gotta watch out for that. But in general, players think that the Alliance side is more difficult to handle compared to the Horde side, and on top of that, you get a bunch of free trash percentage on the Horde side because of those gathers that you can just tag and then they just kill themselves, as you can see on Black Mamba's side here maybe. So there has to be some reason why they're playing Alliance, and we might see some skip later on with the Shadow Melt.
Yep, and of course, Black Mamba has already they've opted to skip that pack before the bridge, like we see most teams doing. They went off and had the rogues deal with all the gutters, and they're just going to go ahead and do this big pull like we see from all the Western teams, where they pull the trash pack on top of the boss, and they're going to use the spotter to cleave everything down except for that one cannoneer. They'll have to actually focus that down with the boss. So if they're able to pull this off, I mean, this is a pretty good indication of, you know, where they are in terms of the comparison to some of the, you know, middle to top tier in Western teams. If they're able to pull off this pull, I mean, we saw multiple teams in the Western region mess this pull up. This is not an easy pull by any means. Having to actually, you know, stack all the mobs up, make sure that whoever gets targeted by the sided artillery is able to place those circles on top of the entire group efficiently. This is like, you know, something. When I'm looking at Black Mamba, I'm wondering how good their execution is, because that's where they've been lacking. Their good times in some of their better dungeons have, you know, competed with the top teams, but execution is like consistency, and execution is what I want to see from Black Mamba, and being able to pull off that pull, you know, that's trending in the right direction.
Yeah, they're looking pretty good so far, except those 3 deaths. But those 3 deaths didn't actually cost them as much time at all, so it's not a huge deal. And it seems like they pulled it off so far. They killed all of the trash that they pulled on top except the spotter that is rooted here in the back. As you can see, and some of those Marauders are not even pulled, so they can pull them on top later on to get the extra percentage. But yeah, one thing to note about their comp is that they're actually not running a Windwalker. That's something we've seen out of the Western region for Siege specifically, just because of the Windwalker's utility that it provides for the spotters. You do have the Ring of Peace, which makes sure that all of the mobs stay kind of grouped so the artillery can hit them all at the same time, and it also has the Windwalker also provides the AoE stun to make sure that they're all stacked inside the artillery. But rogues do not provide an AoE stun, unfortunately, and unholies do not either. So Blizzard, maybe you should buff them and give them some AoE stuns, because they're definitely lacking in utility as far as I can tell. So maybe that's something we're gonna look about. But also one more thing to note is that the Resident is trying Mass Root, maybe because of that specific reason, just to, you know, get them all grouped up and have them for the artillery as the Mass Root goes down.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. 2 players got hit by the cannon barrages in that phase there, like, you know, Proctus cheat death, because rogues have that. That's fair. But unfortunately, Resto Druid just got 1 shot, so they aren't going to have the Resto Druid for the majority of this fight, which means that their tank is going to have to play a little bit more defensive while they have these ads on them. They might not be able to phase the boss. Keep an eye on that energy bar on the bottom. When that gets to 100, Dread Captain Lockwood's going to jump up and start another transition phase. So they're going to be a little close here, but it looks like they're going to be able to phase it. So not having the healer's not that big of a deal. He'll be able to release right here on top of the boss once the boss goes down.
Maybe they can even make it before the boss jumps away. It's going to be really close. And, oh yeah, that was really close, because once the boss jumps away, you have to play the intermission phase on Lockwood. He's not going to die in the middle of the phase. Even if you have bleeds on top, does not matter in any way. So thankfully they did manage to finish it off, and he can release right away as he spawns there. So the rest of it is back up, and Wong does trigger the event here, so the rest of the team can come up as well. And there you go. They will drag the spotter through this area. As you can see, the spotter in the back being alive, and now they have to deal with the emissary, as you can see in the corner. That's something we've seen from the Western region a lot, where they would pull this Demolisher pack with the Buccaneers and just pull the Emissary pack on top, while just having it zap first and then it being rooted by the Resto Druid. But it seems like they're playing it a little bit slower on Black Mamba side, not deciding to pull the other pack on top, just dealing with the Demolisher pack first.
Yeah, unfortunately, over on the side of Pixel, Onezor is not having a good time in this dungeon. I think it's like the 3rd or 4th time I've seen him go down this dungeon. I don't really know Priest mechanics that much. I'm sure Jack is in the back just like gritting his teeth, hoping we could say something smart about Disc Priest, but we're gonna have to wait for him to come back up to say something about them, because he is the Priest expert on the desk here. So, you know, I wonder if it has something to do with the way Priests work in dungeons. If they just don't have, you know, that much preventive, they don't have the right, you know, healing toolkit for MDI. Because there's a reason we you know, predominantly see the Resto Druids, the Mistweaver Monks, the Holy Paladins, and mostly Resto Druids, obviously. They have probably the best damage to healing uptime of any of the healers. So, and I just wonder what it is with Priest. Maybe Jack can enlighten us a little bit later on.
I think the main reason is that the MDI healers are just not as good on Disc Priest as Jack is. Oh. And if Jack would be playing Disc Priest, then they would definitely be way more popular in the MDI. I think that is the biggest problem that they're having. But Black Mamba, on the other hand, they finished off their pull here, the Emissary pull as well. So they're going a little bit slower here, which maybe is because they know they're pretty far ahead at this point, or maybe they just don't want to do the big pulls. Either way, one got stunned by a banana and almost going down, but this is a pretty significant pull, so they gotta be careful. As soon as you run out of cooldowns, defensive cooldowns on their tank, they gotta be very careful, because the Buccaneers is constantly throwing off bananas. It's gonna be dangerous for not only the tank but also the melee.
And you can see they're not doing a good job placing their sided artilleries here at all. Neither of those hit the ads. Tank goes down, and Holy Decay also goes down. They're going to have to, I mean, the Rogues, Moon popped his repost here to stay alive for a little while, so they can kite this out for a little while. As long as they hit these spotted artilleries, they actually could somehow clean this pull up, but it looks like they're going to have to kite it. Their tank is back, so he will be able to pick up aggro and everything. And it's only going to take one more artillery from the spotter to finish this group off, but Healer's just not able to get in. They'll get 1 or 2 ticks of the circle on the group, but it's just because the tank died, it's just not clean.
Yeah, they're having a lot of struggle here. You can see that that's just spreading out. maybe that's one reason, that's what I mentioned earlier, but by not having this Windwalker, not having any sort of AoE stun that will help you out except the tank's stun, Unholy's do not have an AoE stun either, so just lack of utility maybe, not being able to group them up properly, not having the Ring of Peace, not having the Windwalker utility to help them out here, and on top of that they don't have the Typhoon either, right? Because they need the Rasta Druid to have the Mass Root, because they don't have anything else to help them out, so no Typhoon available to stack them up a little bit better either. But now they seem to be recovered. Unfortunately, the rest of you just ran into a banana on the floor, but thankfully it's not a huge deal, not getting hit by anything else outside of it. Also a little bit out of position here, so the first artillery will not hit the packs, but the banana! Oof. Okay.
I love this POV. You can see the characters slip and fall over. Oops, my bad, guys. A little hungry there. Took a banana to the face. Fortunately, it's not causing a wipe, but that could have been scary. He fell on a banana in the sided artillery, which, as we saw from Pixel's side, that does one-shot even the rogues. Unfortunately, just more wipes coming out for Pixel here. Tanks going down. It's just not clean on their. It's even more so not clean on their side. Black Mamba has had deaths, but they've been able to recover the pulls that they've had deaths to. They have the wherewithal to understand what they need to do to live on a particular pull. Even when the tank goes down, you saw the rogues pop the repose and kite it out. That was good fixing of the problem from them. Like these guys are MDI veterans. They've been around for a long time, and I think we even saw there were a lot of times even last season where I think this was the healer where. In Shrine of the Storm, team wipes. He got the shadow mode off and was able to res the grip. And I remember this team was winning a couple maps that they kind of had no business winning after their wipes because of it. Like Black Mamba is one of those teams where they're actually pretty good at fixing pulls when they go wrong.
Yeah, that's definitely something they're pretty good at. Now Pixel actually decided to finish off the spotter before engaging Dread Captain Lockwood, so they do not have the spotter available to them to help them out with the trash afterwards. And once they're actually dropping very low here at the very pool, they gotta be careful because they are out of battle resist for both teams. So if they have any huge mistakes, any like the healer going down, then they're not gonna be able to get them back up. But yeah, so no spotter available for Pixel. There will be one extra spotter later on, but there's a lot of trash they have to go through without the spotter to even get there. While Black Mamba, on the other hand, does have a bunch of deaths here and there. You can see they're up to 9 deaths at this point, but as Sarah mentioned, they're pretty good at recovering their deaths and not having those full team wipes. And they also have the spotter still available to them, so it seems like they want to do this double spotter strategy where they just pull a bunch of trash and try to kill it with the double artillery. But again, they just don't have a lot of utility in their team, so they gotta be careful how they pull that off.
Well, they're opting for the safer strategy too, right? When we saw the Western teams try to pull off the double spotter strategy, it consisted of them running through this entire section of the dungeon, using that monk, like you mentioned earlier, to bring a piece of all the trash together, and then using both of the sided artilleries to AoE all the trash down. They've opted to just go ahead and go through and slowly take care of it one pack at a time, and they're even pulling this extra pack on the side that we don't normally see groups pull just for the extra percentage. This is just like super clean, methodical play, which is exactly what I want to see from them. They know they don't have to go particularly fast in this dungeon to win it.
Yeah, I like this as well, just because again, they probably know that they're this far ahead at this point, and maybe they can even do the other strategy where they pull everything and just play it a little bit riskier, but maybe they're saving those strategy for teams where they have to pull it out. If they know they're behind, they have to do those pulls, maybe they save it for that rather than against Pixel here where they know that they're ahead. So definitely don't have to pull out any super risky strategies at this point. Now it also seems like it seems like they actually finished off the spotter at this point. So because there's a new spotter right in front of them, they finished off the old one, not doing any 2-spotter shenanigans yet, just because it's just safer to get out of combat, finish it off, get a drink off on everybody. And now it also seems like they're doing the safe sniper strategy where you get the Quadra CC off on them.
Yep, I mean, this is just super safe. The important thing to mention about this CC strategy is, of course, normally whenever you do damage to a CC'd mob, it'll break that it'll break their crowd control. But because they're using damage from one of the other, from something that's essentially a friendly mob to them, it doesn't break the sap or the distract that they're using from the rogues. It'll only start breaking once each of the individual players starts doing damage. So you can actually use the spotter to completely cleave down these snipers, remove any chance of dying to those shoots from the snipers, which are incredibly dangerous. They remind me a lot of the snipers from, I believe, the archers from Black Red Cold from Legion, they do a lot of single target damage to individual players in the group when they cast their shoot, and their ricochet does even more damage to the entire group. So yeah, just not having to deal with any of that, it's way easier and way safer. Now, of course, it takes a little bit of time because you aren't able to cleave them down. You have to only use decided artillery. But I mean, like we mentioned, they just want to play safe.
Yeah, so one difference here in strategy as well compared to the Western region is that Black Mamba does actually pull the Emissary of Tide on top here. Something we've seen from the Western region was that the rogues will just go and consistently sap the Emissary of Tides, even though it only lasts 8 seconds, but you can constantly re-CC them because they're not affected by diminishing returns. So you can just keep it out of combat the whole time as a rogue and just constantly sap it, which is something we've seen from the West, as I mentioned before. But Black Mamba just opting to pull the Emissary on top, just nuking it down, even though they're not able to CC any of those mobs while the Emissary is up. But that's why they also go for smaller pulls, and they don't have to deal with any of those other trash packs that they just left up.
Well, something else that we haven't mentioned, I don't think, a single time in this dungeon, because we've just kind of been focusing on the teams themselves. This is also a bursting dungeon, right? Like, so even if they did opt to go for the big pulls where they're pulling 15-20 mobs, 15-20 bursting stacks would just kill you. So it makes sense that they're opting to also just play safe in this dungeon. If they're only pulling 5 or 6 mobs at a time, you can live through 5 or 6 bursting stacks with a small personal or some, a healing cooldown from the healer, or like committing both your health potion. They don't have health stones; they only have health potions. So they can live through 5 or 6 bursting stacks. It makes sense that they're not going for the bigger stack. That just adds an extra level of complexity and danger to the dungeon that they just don't need to put themselves through to take this. I mean, you can see just in raw progression in the dungeon, Black Mamba, they only have to deal with these last 2 trash packs, and then they're finished with trash for the dungeon, and then they have 2 fortified bosses left. So as long as they're able to efficiently deal with his commander while they let the spotter deal with everything else, they're pretty much home free.
Yeah, I wonder... I mean, the Bloodlust timing is a little bit awkward here because they are holding onto their Bloodlust for a pretty long time already, but you don't necessarily want to use Bloodlust for any of those spotter pulls because the mobs are just dying to their artillery anyway, right? So the artillery is not actually getting sped up or doing more damage because of Bloodlust, and therefore it's not actually going to save you as much time. It might just be something that you use for a healer cooldown, so the healer can keep the tank alive for longer. But yeah, also for the bosses, maybe Bloodlust is not going to help you as much because it is a fortified environment. They can do something on the last boss to maybe get a gripping tentacle down, get 1 less demolishing terror spawn. Either way, we'll see what they do with their Bloodlust, but it seems like they're getting 1 less usage out of the dungeon because they're already in here for 20 minutes, meaning they could have had already like almost their 3rd Bloodlust at this point, but they only used 1 so far. So definitely getting 1 less Bloodlust usage. It might not really matter in the end. We'll see what they do. Pixel, on the other hand, still just struggling a lot after 14 deaths.
We were actually talking about Bloodlust usage on the drive over here today, like, a few hours ago when we drove over here. Like, it's interesting to think about how Bloodlust should be used in an MDI dungeon poll, because Bloodlust in a 5-man group is actually not really that strong of a cooldown. If you look at the actual relative strength of it compared to individual class cooldowns, I would say that your individual stacked class cooldowns with potions are stronger than what Bloodlust is. So there's a lot of times where we'll see teams transition from using Bloodlust as an actual damage increase on a boss, for instance, where they'll actually transition it once they've ironed out their strategies. They'll just use Bloodlust to enable a difficult pull that you would otherwise not do because it's way too dangerous to do. Like, for example, like some of the big Italdazar pulls, sometimes in the past we've seen teams use Bloodlust, like for instance the Priestess Alunza pull. People didn't do that before at the start of the dungeon because they wanted to make sure they had their Bloodlust available later on for a second Bloodlust. They thought it would take too long. That's why we saw teams completely change their strategy to go to Priestess Alunza first, use their Shadow Meld and their Bloodlust there, and then they had the second one later on in the dungeon. It's just kind of like I feel like as we get further on in the MDI, seeing these teams, adapt their strategies to do these bigger pulls and enable them with Bloodlust and cooldowns is really interesting to see.
Yeah, most definitely. That's something we've been talking about a lot as well, as you mentioned, just because Bloodlust is something that once one team figured out perfect Bloodlust usage, you don't really want to play around with it that much anymore. At least in the spring season, we've seen people just stick to the same Bloodlust all the time. And then the first cup that we've seen for both of those regions, they kept the same Bloodlust usage as the spring season. But we were constantly questioning it because, like, why would you still do it here? And then teams started to adapt it and actually think about their Bloodlust usage. So that's something I really liked, specifically specifically also in Siege, we've seen Method and A hold on to the Bloodlust a very, very long time just to have it for Lockwood to get one less intermission phase. So stuff like that is very nice to see from those teams, that they constantly think about the strategy and constantly think about what they have to do and adapt to just get a little bit extra seconds and just be a little bit faster compared to the other teams.
I think the best example of it overall, you mentioned Siege, like Method and A strategy in Siege, they're the only team that does that. But I think the best strategy change that we've seen with Bloodlust usages has to be an underrot. I think for the entire first season, plus the first week actually of this MDI, we saw teams use their Bloodlust on Elderly Accent and the Unbound Abomination, the first and fourth boss.
Yeah.
But we started seeing teams last weekend commit their Bloodlust to a larger trash pull in Kragmaw's room, and they're able to do that room in 2 or 3 pulls rather than 4 pulls, just because of the Bloodlust usage. And like we've mentioned several times throughout this entire cup, whenever you're speedrunning these dungeons, your number one priority is to complete the dungeon in as few safe pulls as possible. And using a Bloodlust to reduce the amount of pulls you're doing is exactly how you want to be kind of crafting these MDT, these dungeon routes. So it's just really interesting to see the evolution of dungeon routes from these teams as they go through the years and get more practiced.
That was very heartbreaking to see on Pixel's side as they finished off the trash and Komi almost survived, but he had the poison on him, and priests unfortunately are not able to dispel a poison debuff. So he was just ticking down to the poison plus the bursting, and Oncer was not able to dispel or keep Komi alive. Very unfortunate. That's also one thing why priests struggle a little bit, I guess, because poisons are actually a lot of debuffs are poisons in dungeons, so not being able to dispel it is also kind of a big deal, especially because there's no other damage dealer who can dispel it in return either. So very unfortunate for them. As Black Mamba, they're already on the last boss here. It is 45, so in theory it shouldn't be a big deal for them. But we've seen lots of teams struggle on this fight, specifically because you can't use the spotters anymore to deal with the tentacles. That's something we've seen in the spring final, where they would just drag the double spotters on top of this boss and just kill the tentacles with their artillery. But that's not something you can do anymore, so you need to commit the damage onto the gripping terrors to not have the demolishing terror spawn anymore.
Talking about using Bloodlust to enable big pulls, looks like Pixel has used their Bloodlust and pulled all of Haddle's room at the same time, and they're actually kind of pulling it off. Elo did go down, the tank is dropping incredibly low, tank goes down. They have a battle res for him though, and they might be able to pull us back together if they get it off in time. Fame goes down as well, but there's enough mobs low enough to where they might actually be able to finish this off. And we've been kind of side-eyeing Pixel for most of this game, but being able to pull off that pull, I mean, there might be a little bit more to them than just their time trial times. Like, being that pull is a difficult pull, and yeah, they committed their Bloodlust to it, and yeah, they're not exactly the cleanest in pulling it off, but even attempting that and almost getting it just like that, it was cool to see.
It also seems like they're not actually using the spotter at all, so maybe that's it makes it even more impressive, to be honest, because this whole room, without having the help of the spotter and the artillery, just having huge amounts of damage with the DK and the Demon Hunter using all their cooldowns to nuke it down without the spotter. Pretty impressive. I mean, they did end up having lots of people die, but they're actually going to finish it off, so not as bad as it could be. But Black Mamba committed their Bloodlust, and they have their final shot to finish off the dungeon and go 1-0 against Pixel.
Yeah, I mean, Black Mamba, once again, like we expected, they take game 1 here, and it wasn't exactly the most clean run from them, but final cannon shot goes off for the fixed cannon, and yeah, Black Mamba 1-0 in the series.
And they get the job done there onto Borealis, taking that game number 1, and definitely showing, they're having those struggles with execution, as we mentioned before the matchup here, but it's showing they're getting a little bit more comfortable in that environment, and it's gotten a lot harder as well, Tettle, since we're moving up from a 17 to an 18.
I think that's a very good point, and we actually saw some of these issues from Black Mamba last week as well, where they were running through the dungeon and they had good strategies to be able to employ in some of these dungeons, but they just have some issues, like the healer being dead for 40 seconds on this fight because he ended up accidentally wild charging into the heavy cleave, like right as it was going off from the Vanguard. And then they also end up having another healer death on this fight just because he's holding the cannon and can't get out of the ground effect too quick enough. So they have some mistakes throughout the whole entire dungeon, but just in general, their strategies are there and their strategies are good, but they just need to have their consistency just improve a little bit. Black Mamba overall is a pretty strong team, and I would expect to see them probably go deep this week, just in terms of like what other teams we have available to us. And then like they have moments of brilliance, like that spotter pull that they've just done on screen is a really challenging pull, and it's very technical to make sure that all the mobs are grouped up and that your tank doesn't end up going down, because that can actually be a very dangerous pull for your tank if he doesn't have all of his defensives available to him. But overall, Black Mamba, they do a good job and they have clean runs. but it's on some points they also have like major issues. So whenever we see them play up against another team like Buff or Nerf Rogue, I expect them to have some challenges.
I think so as well. We'll have to see it for the next matchup, or for the next map here, because King's Rest is not any kind of scrub dungeon whatsoever. So we're taking a quick break before we go into it. Don't go anywhere, guys. The MDI will be back right after this. We're all set and ready to go for game number 2 between Black Mamba and Pixel. We'll be diving into King's Rest right now as we have Fortified, Explosive, and Volcanic.
Yeah, so King's Rest, one of those dungeons that unfortunately we've seen lots of... oh my god, that's mages, a lot of them. Oh, that's actually just a mistake with the group frame. So that's just the observers as far as I'm aware. There's no mages, unfortunately. It's just the observers that we can see. They're playing a 10-man dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching Classic. We've seen 10-man dungeons.
True.
It's not that big of a deal. I think we've seen... I mean, if you've been watching Classic, mages are actually great. What they can do is they can Frost Nova things, right? And then they can Blizzard, and then Kona Cold. They do a lot of AoE group damage, so it's great for them. Unfortunately, like the Monk has gone down on this initial skip here to the minions of Zul, it looks like. So, a little unfortunate death from them. They'll be able to res him up as long as they haven't already hit the gong. So, oh no, they're just in combat with the Guardian, so they're going to have to go ahead and deal with these.
Well. Pixel is having the same problem, actually. Komi going down from one of the frontals. You can see explosive spawn everywhere, and Pixel is actually in combat with 4 of the Guardians, so they will have to have a full team wipe unless Oncer is going to have a Shadow Melt that he can pull off. Other than that, they need to reset the pull completely.
No. Black Mamba, this is the team that did this last week. They went for this 4 Guardian pull. Okay, well, Pixel has full wiped. But no, this makes sense. I'm pretty sure Black Mamba tried to do this pull in the first Eastern Cup, and I only see they have 3 of the Guardians. I'm not actually sure how that's possible. Maybe they're not linked.
Yeah, they're not linked.
They're not linked. Okay, cool. So they've got 3 Guardians, and we did see. I'm pretty sure we did see them pull 4 of the Guardians last in the first Eastern Cup, and they ended up wiping to it, and it was like their only major mistake they made throughout the entire dungeon, and it actually almost ended up costing them the dungeon. I believe they came back at the last second and won that map, but. Yeah, this is an interesting change to their strategy to see because, I mean, I'm a huge fan of pulling the Guardians at the start because it allows you to skip one of those bridge trash packs later on, which are in general a lot more dangerous than these Guardians. Of course, the main reasoning for that is, of course, those suppression slams this patch were changed to only target the tank. So as long as the tank is moving around and the group knows where the tank is standing, there's no way you'll ever get hit by them. So this is a really cool strategy. And, you know, they did have a couple deaths early on, but it looks like it's not going to be a full wipe for them.
Yeah, so they have the 2 deaths. Unfortunately, they didn't cost them too much time. While Pixel, on the other hand, they did have it did cost them a lot more time because it seems like Pixel didn't actually intend on pulling the Guardians, but they just pulled them anyway somehow. Didn't manage to get the aggro off. So they had 3 players die on their side and did have to reset the Guardians. But now they pulled 2 packs together, which is something we see on live servers a lot as well. Those first 2 packs that you can see where there's only 1 Witch Doctor in there, and the Witch Doctor are the most dangerous mobs that you have to deal with in those packs in general. Komi actually going down as the champion is raging. Oh, they actually don't have a Raging Dispel in their groups. There's no Druid, no Hunter to get rid of the champion when he buffs himself, the Raging.
They did have their battle res, so they did have to commit that right there for their tank. They won't have that available, so neither of the groups has a battle res available. Yeah, that's another reason why we normally see the rest of Druids come out, especially in Raging. Their toolkit kind of just does it all. Raging, nah, soothe that. That's great. I mean, it's something that we kind of are just so used to seeing that it's, oh yeah, it's a Raging affix. Yeah, the Resto Druid's really going to have to make sure they manage their Soothe cooldown. But yeah, not having a Resto Druid for Raging is a little unfortunate for them. So we'll have to keep an eye on whether or not that's going to be a problem for them going on. And once again, Komi and Fame going down, and this is just going to be a full team wipe for them.
Yeah, there's no way. I'm not really sure if Oncer is actually, I think he's got Shadow Melt. I believe you just can't see it on the buffs, but I do believe he is playing Night Elf, but he didn't manage to get the Shadow Melt off. Unfortunately, I also don't see if the cooldown is ready or not, so they have to run back, and all of the trash mobs are still there to start because they didn't finish off those Guardians, so I believe they don't have the Shroud available and Elo because they only have 1 Rogue, so they will have to deal with those mobs. As you can see, they're just charging in onto this, on top of this Void Emissary and the champion as well, so they will have to nuke down the Void Emissary before they die to those AoE casts, or they have to go in line of sight if they don't have enough damage to deal with it. But yeah, they have to do some trash that they didn't plan on doing because of this full team wipe that happened to them. And Black Mamba also having some issues. Their Monk going down again.
Yeah, Lyke has now died twice in this dungeon. I think the first time was just a messed up skip from them. It wasn't exactly the cleanest skip, so he ended up going down to those minions of Zool. So I wouldn't really blame that one on him. But yeah, another death on this trash back here as a melee DPS. I'd imagine that he got hit by some of those gust slashes. Not exactly the ideal scenario for a melee player. So we'll have to keep an eye on that going forward. You see him channeling his Latent Arcana trinket, the Ishara trinket, the font of Ishara off in the corner there. He'll have a lot of damage for this pull with the Touch of Death and the Cologne, so we'll keep an eye on his damage here. Should be pretty high. Hopefully it's high. Hopefully I'm not just making things up again. But yeah, this dungeon's going to be a lot easier for Black Mamba just because of that Druid. Being able to soothe the raging on a ton of these mobs in here, notably the champions, of course. I mean, it's a big deal on this Raging Affix. And not to mention, they also have hit explosives, so it's really dangerous. Not raging, by the way. Only the champions rage. Just making things up once again. I think that's going to be my bit this week. I'm going to make a lot of things up. That's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, just the champions, of course. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they're able to pull this off. But unfortunately, he ends up going down with one of the rogues as well. Hopefully they're able to clean this pull up.
They had a lot of deaths. They had, I believe it was Wong, the monk, and Moon go down first, and then we see Envis go down as well. I'm not completely sure if one of the rogues actually managed to stay in combat with the mobs. Doesn't seem like it. So the whole pool reset. This is going to cost them a lot of time. You can see the whole pool reset. They have to do all of it again. But I mean, in the end, Pixel still very far behind just because of this huge team wipe they had and not having another Shroud available to them. They had to just go back and finish off all of those Guardians that Black Mamba already dealt with on their very first pull. So Black Mamba still had Pixel as well on 9 deaths. So both of those teams actually completely even on time, as both have 45 seconds of death penalty. One thing I don't really like about Black Mamba's strategy here is that they're not committing their Bloodlust on those difficult trash pulls. And I mean, you can see how much they are struggling, because those are very difficult pulls. And you have those Witch Doctors who constantly need to be interrupted. Any cast that goes through is a huge problem for the tank. And if a Shadow Bolt volley goes through, it's a huge problem for the team. And then you also have those explosives that you have to deal with. And we've seen some Eastern teams struggle with explosives in the past. So just not committing the Bloodlust, just saving it, what I assume is for the boss, seems not very efficient in my opinion.
Yeah, it's actually kind of scary how close these two teams are together, but it makes a lot of sense, right? In King's Rest on Fortified, I would say that the two hardest parts of the dungeon are, number one, this first boss trash room. All these trash pulls are incredibly dangerous to deal with. The champion alone is probably the most dangerous part of this trash, as long as you're getting the Shadow Bolt volley kicks like you mentioned. And then after that is going to be the Berserker trash on the bridge. So seeing Black Mamba get through this first trash room, yeah, even though it wasn't clean, we've seen how they pull this dungeon. Whenever they did this entire dungeon in the first Eastern Cup, they did have problems at the start of the dungeon. But on top of that, they were able to clean up the run for the rest of the dungeon afterwards. So hopefully they're able to keep it clean with the practice that they already have in this dungeon. And like you mentioned, very weird strategy. They end up using their Bloodlust on the Golden Serpent, on the Fortified boss, which they definitely should have used that on the trash.
I agree. I don't think this is very efficient at all, just because the boss, not only is it fortified, but it also got nerfed, right? So the Spit Gold debuff that you can see getting applied to the players that will drop the gold pool on the floor after a couple of seconds doesn't actually do as much damage anymore. And that's why Envis can actually go into cat form and do a lot of DPS, just because it doesn't require a lot of healing anymore. And therefore, this boss is really not as difficult, because that was the biggest difficulty of the Golden Serpent. Having the Spit Gold do just an insane amount of single target damage to those players. And that's why most of the teams were committing their Bloodlust to this boss earlier, or in the spring season, because of it. But now with the fortified setting and the Spit Gold nerf, I don't really like the Bloodlust commitment for the boss anymore. But maybe they just figured they want to have more single target damage and just finish it off faster. Either way, they are on 30% on the Golden Serpent here with 9 deaths, while Pixel is still struggling. They're on 14 deaths at this point, and they also have not committed their Bloodlust yet. Yeah.
I wonder what it is this week. Like maybe one of the affixes is actually quaking and the US just lying to us. I mean, it's not. We've seen both explosive and volcanic going off. Maybe there's a hidden fifth affix that makes this boss a little bit more difficult.
Probably.
But yeah, it's definitely a very weird strategy to see from these teams to commit their Bloodlust to this boss. I mean, with the amount of deaths they had to trash, you'd have to think that it's a lot more efficient to use the Bloodlust on the more difficult portion of this dungeon. So A little bit of mistakes from them, but you know what? As long as they're clean for the rest of the dungeon, I'll give it to them. Yeah, we did unfortunately see, while we were talking about Black Mamba on the boss here, Pixel did have another full team wipe on their side while they were dealing with that second-to-last trash pull in this room. I think once this mob goes down, they are done with all the trash in the room, and they are on the same trash percentage as Black Mamba, so I'm pretty sure that's correct. And then they popped their bloodlust while nothing was in combat with them. That's some sick DPS they're pulling off right now.
I think that's actually just to make use of it, because they saw that they're in the dungeon for more than 10 minutes now, so they figured, oh, wait a second, we have the ability called Bloodlust, let's use it right now. So I definitely like the usage of Bloodlust right there. Unfortunately, it does not speed up the mana drinking when you use the Fish Feast, but maybe that's something they thought. Maybe they thought it will speed up the mana regen from the priest so they can pull the boss faster. Anyway, moving on, as Black Mamba is on the gauntlet here, they only have one Guardian left, one of the constructs that they didn't pull at the start. I don't think they're gonna pull it on top of the gauntlet. Either way, at least I don't see it yet. If the healer wants to go pull it, he will go later. Actually, no, he can't go anymore.
They already pulled them.
Oh,
they pulled them at the start of the
one?
They pulled
no,
three.
I mean the fourth.
Just the one. I'm not sure if they would want to do that. They'd have to commit their Shadow Meld to dodging the Void Emissary.
Oh,
so,
true.
We'll have to see. Maybe they do it. Maybe this is they specifically only pulled 3 so that they have a particular individual mob count that they're going for. We'll have to keep an eye on that, because Black Mamba, I mean, we've seen. This is actually a different strategy with only 3 of the animated Guardians, but I'm interested to see what they're ending up pulling. I mean, we've been talking about King's Rest. King's Rest is very much not a solved dungeon, right? When we talk about solved dungeons, we talk about dungeons where teams have kind of committed to doing the exact same route because they've just kind of realized that that's best, or that's the best route. Like, so for instance, Waycrest Manor in the spring season, Team D kind of solved the dungeon, everyone took the route and did that. I think Freehold is pretty much at the point where it's kind of solved as well, and it's just down to execution. So King's Rest is very much not that. There are definitely a lot of teams doing different strategies in this dungeon, kind of mixing up their pull counts, skipping different packs, figuring out what they have cooldowns for, what they don't have them for. So very interested to see if Black Mamba comes out with a strategy or like a pull route that seems better than what we've seen from any of the Western teams.
I think what I would really like to see from Black Mamba is this one strategy we've seen from Method EU, because last Cup, Method, or the Western region in general, had the time trials King's Rest, and Method EU had like a 2-minute faster King's Rest time compared to anyone else. And then everyone was thinking about, oh my god, what is Method EU doing? What kind of crazy pull are they doing in King's Rest just to get this fast time? And then they were playing the dungeon live on Cup last weekend, and it seemed like the only thing that was really like putting them ahead was that the fact that they were distracting the Brute before he patrolled into the Emissary, and then they could skip the Brute because of that, because the Emissary actually makes mobs stop patrolling, and what the Brute usually does, it starts in the back and then it will patrol in the front and go into the Emissary and then it will stop there. So if you don't go there early and use the C or distract the Brute, then you can't get him out of the pack anymore, and you have to deal with it. And Method EU smartly just self-passed there really fast to be able to distract the Brute and not having to kill it. So that's something that maybe Black Mamba picked up from the Western region, what I personally think is a very smart way to deal with the bridge area, and I think that's something we're going to see from most of the teams in the future as well.
Yeah, I think it was they distracted twice, then they bring Peace so that he stayed on the bridge, and at that point they were able to actually, they had already pulled the pack, so they didn't have to worry about him patrolling back into the center of the room. So yeah, it was really interesting, and that was also enabled by the fact that they did the 2 Guardian pulls at the start of the dungeon, where they pulled 2 on top of the boss and then 2 into the gauntlets. So like there's a lot of pre-setup involved in this dungeon, and you can kind of theorize what teams are planning to pull on the bridge based off of how many of those Guardians they pull at the start of the dungeon. So we've seen 2 Guardians, we've seen 4 Guardians. I don't think we've ever seen 3. That's why I'm so intrigued by this.
Yeah, I wonder if they want to pull the construct right after this gauntlet.
Ooh, yeah.
They want to test the beam to maybe get the last percentage that they need. I'm not disliking the strategy of pulling 3 constructs, just because I think by pulling only one of the entrance constructs, you don't have to get in combat with the Void Emissary, because you can maybe pull it from range without going too close to the Void Emissary. So maybe that's something they did, but it seemed like they were in combat with the Shadow of Souls at the start, and they were having some trouble there as well. Either way, we'll see what they do to get that last percentage, and we'll also see if they manage to skip this Brute or not. They're done with the gauntlet now, while Pixel is still working on it. Pixel at this point up to 14 deaths, but they did manage to finish off the first boss easily without any issues, even though they did waste half of their bloodlust before even pulling the boss.
Yeah, and we'll have to see how they do planning on pulling that construct, because obviously if they're going to pull it, they're not going to pull it right now. They're going to pull it once all the oozes in this room are dealt with, and once they're cleaving the 2 constructs inside the room on top of one of the sides of the room. So they'll be cleaving 3 constructs down. So we'll have to see how to deal with that. Now, of course, we've had bursting in this dungeon for the past few weeks, so we've always kept an eye on how teams are pulling this dungeon. No bursting this week. However, volcanic and explosive when you're pulling this many mobs is incredibly dangerous to look out for. You have to keep an eye on how many volcanics are spawning on the healer here. But if the healer's in melee, the volcanics are just going to spawn in melee, so you have to keep an eye on that as well. And they're actually getting very good explosive spawns. I think I've only seen like 3 or 4 pop off. There we go, 2 spawning now, 3 spawning now. So they'll have to keep an eye on how they deal with those explosives. But so far, they've done a fantastic job of dealing with them. Now, they didn't pull the entire room. They left those 4 on the side that you can see there. It might have been a little bit more dangerous if they pulled actually everything. So there's a little bit of a safety pull from them. They'll be able to cleave these 5 mobs down pretty safely afterwards. But I mean, already on just the 5 mobs they're pulling, they got 2 explosives right off the bat. So there's a little bit of RNG involved with explosives, but they're able to deal with them pretty well.
Yeah, we all love some RNG in World of Warcraft, don't we? But one thing that they're good at, the rogues, is explosive killing, right? And they have 2 rogues in their setup here for Black Mamba, so they should be pretty fine to get to kill them all as they spawn. Even if they get a little bit unlucky and have more explosive spawn, rogues in general are just very good at killing them. And one thing that is also good is the increased range, the increased melee range from the outlaw rogues, meaning they don't actually have to step into the pools here in the floor, the green pools, because if there's one explosive that spawns inside, you can just still finish it off without stepping in because of the increased melee range. So definitely an advantage here for having the double rogues to deal with explosives. And now they're just finishing off those 2 guardian, the constructs here, which do put you into one of those tomes in the side, but all you have to do is click on it and it would always pull you into the closest one. So as long as you tank the constructs close to a single one, you know exactly where the player is going to end up being.
Yeah, Wong is getting absolutely clapped by these constructs here, but yeah, we'll have to keep an eye. I feel like if they pulled the purification construct like you were guessing they would, I feel like they would have pulled it already at this point. But since they're on this side of the room, I don't think they're planning on doing it unless they just want to cleave it down with the boss, just do pure 2-target cleave. I mean, it'd be really interesting to see them do that, but I don't think we'll see them do that. So yeah, one of the constructs going down. Of course, they'll be pulling the boss here pretty shortly. Both constructs end up going down there, nice and easy. And they're setting up to do something, but they're not actually. Is someone stuck inside? What are they doing? They're just not doing anything. Okay, let's pull the boss, guys. Yeah, Manchumba and Balmer, second boss of the dungeon. And it looks like they're not going to pull that purification construct. They've been thrown for a loop there. I was wondering what they were doing. Maybe they were doing like a little pep talk before
I know what they're doing. They were tapping to WoW Classic and move their characters so they don't DC, so they don't go back into queue. That's exactly what they were doing. And now they prevented the disconnect and they're on their way to fighting Machimba. Machimba, one of those bosses that just does a lot of tank damage. We heard Slew talk about it a lot. This tanks having to be very careful to be able to survive this, but it's a fortified setting and none of the affixes really do anything for this boss fight. You don't have anything like Grievous or Necrotic that will prevent you, or they will make it even more difficult. So it should be okay for Wong to stay alive. They also have their Bloodlust available currently and they're not choosing to use it here. So we will probably see something like a bigger bridge pull or something like that where they want to commit their Bloodlust later on, or maybe they want to save it all the way for Shadow of Zul, but that's still a long way to go.
The Shadow of Zul would be interesting to see. That'd be the first time I think we've seen that before. We've seen teams commit with their Bloodlust Shadow of Zul, so that's not saving the second one all the way to Shadow of Zul would be something brand new though. Yeah, like you mentioned, they're probably planning on using that second Bloodlust on the Berserker pull directly after the second boss, which is a pull that I think we see the most wipes to out of any team. You know, once your tank gets up to 2 or 3 of that bleed stack, and if he doesn't have Stone Form to use the Dwarf Racial to remove that bleed, they're just gonna die. So we'll have to keep an eye on how they deal with those bleed stacks afterwards. But yeah, Pixel not actually that far behind in this dungeon, which is pretty impressive from them, considering what their experience is in dungeons on live. So they're doing a pretty good job of just kind of completing this dungeon so far.
Yeah, and was actually having some struggle here staying alive as he got one of the fire ticks, I believe. So nice recovery there as they don't have a battle rest available, but even if they would have a battle rest available, there's no one else who can rest other than the Rest Druid, so he has a lot of pressure on him to stay alive. No way of getting him back up if they're in the middle of a boss fight. Now, as we said, Pixel actually not that far behind. They're really not in raw dungeon speed. Now, they're obviously 7 deaths ahead, so they're behind in time because of that. But outside of that, they're doing pretty well, considering that, you know, they have a disc freeze, right? So they're always going to think about that. They're handicapped with the disc freeze, so they got to watch out. And everything is kind of impressive that they're doing. Now, unfortunately, they have their tank go down and one of the damage dealers go down. Not completely sure if they can even finish off this pull. Maybe the priest can get off a shadow melt, as you can see right there. Yeah, he should be out of combat now, so he can rest the team back up, as Black Mamba is probably doing a pretty decent pull here, decently sized one. Maybe committing the Bloodlust? Doesn't seem like it.
No, they're not committing their Bloodlust, so we'll have to see where they plan on using that. We're not seeing the distract strategy coming out from them here, so we'll see that Brute just patrol right into the next group. But if I remember properly, Black Mamba just opts to skip both of these two packs, but Wong does go down, unfortunately. They have a battle res if they want to get him up here, but I'm not sure if they necessarily need to. They should be able to get this Berserker down. They'll probably lose one of their DPS to the bleed when it comes out here. He does go on the rogue. He doesn't have Stormform available, so he does die to the bleed, but they should be able to finish off the Berserker before the next blade comes out. So actually very interesting presence of mind to not use the battle res when they don't need to. You did see that Severing Blade, I believe, go on one of the clones. No, I think they just Stormformed it off. So yeah, that was a, I mean, pretty insane presence of mind to just not use that one battle res they had there.
It's actually kind of interesting to that they're struggling so much on this pull, because there was really only one Berserker and two casters. Seems like they were not interrupting Spectral Bolts that much, because Wong struggling so much on just two casters and one Berserker seems a little bit weird, but maybe they just didn't want to commit any sort of cooldowns to this pull, because it is a smaller pull, just to have the cooldowns later on. Now, they did use the Shroud to go past the rest of the trash. Wong, unfortunately, getting in combat, so they will have to commit a rest. But yeah, one more thing to note is that none of them are dwarfs, which is interesting because we see them a lot. We have 5 Night Elves here, so none of them are actually able to get off the Berserker stacks. So in case there's something going wrong with Wong just getting a bunch of bleeds on him, or anyone else getting bleeds, there's no way of them to actually get rid of them. So that's very interesting. Not completely sure why they chose a full Night Elf team. It has something to do with their trash skip, I assume, right after this boss.
Yeah, but something else to mention here is they got through that entire bridge using one Shroud. Most teams we see, if they do the skip that we just saw Black Mamba pull off, they have to commit 2 Shrouds to using it. Instead, they all use Lightfoot potions to get through the entire bridge. So, interesting change of strategy. It means that they won't have a potion up for the start of this boss, but they'll have one up for this. They'll have a second potion up later on, probably right about now is when it would come up. So, interesting thing. They must be doing that because they want to use a second Shroud somewhere later on, probably right after this first boss to skip those 2 Berserkers. So, I mean, that's just kind of interesting. We don't see anyone from the Western team really doing that. They usually use 2 Shrouds to get through that bridge.
Yeah, we definitely see that. That's why we also saw one of the teams run triple rogue, right? Just to enable these kind of Shroud skips. So interesting to see that Mamba can do the skip without needing the double Shroud. Probably, well, it helps them a lot because they can Shroud backwards now. And this is just, I think this is just a safety play, really, to Shroud past the trash first and deal with the boss. Because once you down this council boss, you do enable the respawn here on this very platform. So when you do one of those more difficult bridge pulls and anyone goes down, you can just release immediately and you'll spawn right here. So that's it's just such a big safety net to gain, especially because those bridge pulls are just so dangerous, and we've seen so many teams have trouble with it. And if you have people die and you did not enable the spawn point here, you spawn all the way at the entrance and it takes so long for you to get back.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a huge pain if you end up wiping without any of those checkpoints, especially because most of these teams don't actually unlock the separate checkpoints in this dungeon. Of course, the first checkpoint is unlocked by killing off that purification construct that we were talking about before Mamba. If you don't kill that and you try to take the shortcut, you're just going to be in combat with it. So yeah, these teams don't have any of the checkpoints unlocked until they kill the third boss, so it's really important to mention that. Now, of course, this week, because we're in that explosive affix, Xana's Otherwise is a little bit more dangerous than usual because the explosives can spawn on each of these totems in the room, so you're going to see them kind of opt for a more safe strategy of spreading out all of their DPS to different totems just so they can deal with potential explosive spawns. But it looks like they're able to deal with it nice and clean, and they shouldn't get a second totem set because we are on that fortified affix where the boss has less HP than it would on Tyrannical. Very clean execution from Black Mamba so far, and we mentioned it. Like, the start of their dungeon, it was shaky. They had 9 deaths at the start of the dungeon, but for the entire rest of the dungeon so far, they've only had 4 deaths. They've been a lot more clean, and 2 of them came on that Berserker pull just now. So they're definitely a lot more clean in this second half of the dungeon than they were, you know, earlier on.
Yeah, most definitely. And also, one thing to know about their Bloodlust, they have been holding onto it for quite a long time. I believe it came up at Machimba already. So definitely have something in mind for that Bloodlust usage. We'll see. Maybe they're doing a bit bigger trash pull on the bridge later. Or maybe it's really for the Shadow of Soul. Maybe they really just struggled with that mini-boss, which is probably the most dangerous mini-boss out of all dungeons, Shadow of Soul, just because of the sheer amount of magic damage it does to the tank. So we'll see what they use their Bloodlust for. But now they only have to deal with Akali at this point. This council fight actually has a set rotation of bosses on the tournament realm. So it's always Akali last, and Sanasal second, and then AF Kula first.
Yeah, something else I'm interested to see, and this is a complete side note. I mean, this is nothing to do with the actual tournament whatsoever, but the Western region last weekend, Abracadabra, Ashine in Discord was messing around saying, oh, we're going for the most deaths in a weekend for a winning team. And I think they ended the week with something like 120 deaths. So
yeah.
Black Mamba is on a pretty good pace so far with his first 2 dungeons. I'm interested to see if they're able to keep up with Abracadabra there. So, interesting to see what they plan on using this Bloodlust for. You see them kind of stopping at the door there, making sure they all get through the RP at the same time so that they are all back into the game when they get to this trash pack. And I think you might be right. I think they're planning on just saving the Bloodlust for the Shadow of Soul.
Yeah, so unfortunately, Pixel having a full team wide, One-Star almost managed to kite them off out and maybe get a Shadow Melt off, but unfortunately didn't manage, so they will have to respawn. And this is what we've been talking about. They did not uncheck this spawn point where you can talk to the NPC here and get teleported to the bridge because they didn't kill this construct. So they will have to release, everyone spawns at the entrance and you have to walk all the way back. So a huge time loss there for Pixel. But Black Mamba dealing with this pretty difficult Berserker pack here, and again they don't have to Stormform. So if anything goes wrong and they don't deal with the Berserkers properly, then there's going to be a huge problem for them. Wong not having the shield wall available either. But now they're on. They actually, this is a pretty decent pull. They actually pulled 2 packs together here with a Void Emissary, with an Emissary that they have to knock out.
Yeah, the most dangerous part of this pool. Whoa, never mind. We're going down. They have a Battle Res form, should they choose to use it, but the Monk is also going down. They're just going to Shadow Meld and res this. Yeah, you can't start off a pull like that. I was going to say the start of this pull is probably the most dangerous part because you have to pull that pack in from afar. And if any of those explosives spawn early on, that could be incredibly dangerous. Did the Rogue release? Okay, no, he released at the boss. So yeah, I was like, did he release at the start of the instance? That'd be terrible. That'd be catastrophic. But no, yeah, they just respawned at the 3rd boss, so not a big deal. He can stealth right by those Berserkers. Yeah, now the important thing to mention, they did deal with the Emissary, even though they wiped on that pull there and had 2 deaths. The Emissary is gone, so they don't have to worry about any of the reflect damage. But yeah, there was a lot going on there. If those explosives spawned on that far pull, they'd have to do damage into the Reflect Emissary, and they could end up doing a lot of damage to themselves. I mean, their pistol shots when they're buffed by Deadshot do something like 100k when they crit, so that's a lot of Reflect damage to deal to yourself if the explosive is inside that Emissary. So there's a lot going on at the start of that pull, and they didn't end up wiping just due to poor management. But, you know, quick thinking. We talk about the healer on Black Mamba. They're a quick thinker. This team has done a lot of good things just fixing pulls throughout this year. Yeah,
and one more thing to note is that if they know that they're this far ahead compared to Pixel at this point, then they don't have to do any of those really huge pulls anymore. Maybe they try to do the bigger pull, and when they realize, you know what, let's just Shadow Meld and just do this one by one, right? There's no point in us even showing this pull, even if they can pull it off, which is something, you know, they will figure out in practice. If they can pull off this big pull with the double packs, which is very dangerous, by the way, then they don't really have to do it right now. They can just save it later on for other teams where the games are a little bit closer, because this game here against Pixel, I mean, they're really far ahead, so they don't have to do any of these shenanigans, any of these super risky pulls. But yeah, they're still holding on to the Bloodlust, so I assume they really just are going to use it for Shadow of Soul. Unfortunately, the Monk going down, but he can release as they got the checkpoint here, which he just doesn't want to. He's checking his WoW Classic again.
Yeah, well, he would have to go by the 2 Berserkers. And
that's true.
I don't think there's any way he's going to do that without an Invis Pod, but, you know, he probably could do that at this point. I don't think this is enough trash. I still think they still have to pull 2 more mobs after this so they can get trash count for Shadow of Zul. Yeah, they have to be at 96% for Shadow of Zul. So, what are they going to put? This is where the 3 Guardian question comes into mind. Why wouldn't they just pull the 4th Guardian? That would give them that would give them almost the trash count they need. So it's like kind of a questionable play I feel like to pull this pack.
Maybe they were intending on pulling the Guardian but somehow didn't aggro it, and then they already had their Shadow Melts off and they couldn't get it anymore. They just decided, you know what, we're just going to do something later. Maybe it was like a decision that they made on the fly and something didn't work out the way they wanted to earlier, didn't get the percentage that they needed. Either way, they actually have 2 damage dealers go down here. I believe it was the Raptor Jump that killed them. They also had a Poison Diva from the Beastmaster frontal cone that, you know, if positioned properly, it actually doesn't have to hit the whole team. They also have 2 Poison Dispels in their team, as both the Windwalker and the Resolute are able to dispel it. On the other hand, Pixel actually does not have any Poison Dispels whatsoever, so they got to be super careful. And we just saw one story got knocked up very far in the air by this Brute, and unfortunately going down as they have a full team wipe on their side. And Black Mamba only needs to finish off those 2 Raptors, and then they're going to have enough percentage to move on to Shadow of Soul.
Yeah, poor Tattles walked up to the desk and now he's walking away holding his head with his hands, so we'll have to keep an eye on what he plans on doing with MDT after this. I'm actually kind of interested to see what he plans on doing, because I want an explanation for the 3 Guardian routes. So Black Mamba actually finishing off their trash count. They're moving on to Shadow of Zul here, and this is the big moment. Do they use their Bloodlust on the Shadow of Zul? Was Nagura right?
They will.
Is she right?
There we
She's
go.
right. Wow. I mean, they had to save it for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, that was actually 10
They could have
minutes.
used it and then used a third. Okay, whatever. That's pretty silly that they waited so long. Of course, they did wipe, right? They wiped, so they're just going for a safety play. I think this is probably. I mean, we talk about how dangerous the other trash is, but so many consistent times we get to the Shadow of Zul, and we say, oh, there's no way the tank's going to die, and then in the last 5% they die. So yeah, there's no way Wong's going to die with Bloodlust here, right?
I mean, he probably just cast a curse. I mean, he is going to go down, but I mean, he still. Wow. All right. But yeah, Wong popping his shield wall here at the very end. Now they're out of cooldowns. No more defenses available except the shout for Wong, so he needs to be able to stay alive here. Now, Bloodlust running out as well. But yeah, the debuff that actually gets applied to the tank actually stays even if Shadow of Zul dies. So sometimes the tanks on live servers, they will just, you know, tank Shadow of Zul, and as soon as Shadow of Zul dies, they just leap away from the healer and just run away. And then the healer can't actually heal the debuff that stayed on them, and they'll go down. But none of those mistakes for Black Mamba. And the one thing to note as well is that they actually did get 100% trash now. It's just a graphic mistake, so they actually have all of the trash that they need in this dungeon right now.
Yep, and man, Pixel is just not having a good time with this bridge trash. I mean, we talk about how dangerous it is to deal with, but for a team like Pixel, and I want to give Pixel credit where credit's due. If you go look at the Raider IO for live, I think their highest time dungeon is a 15. So the fact that they played so well up to this point in a dungeon that's 3 above what they've actually timed on live, you got to give them credit for that. They played pretty well to get to this point. But yeah, I mean, it's just unfortunate. It goes to show how dangerous the trash on this bridge is. The Brute, the Berserker, all of these spectral mobs, even the Beastmaster is hard to deal with for a team that's not practiced in doing it. So you got to give them credit where credit's due. They've been playing, I think they've been playing pretty much above where their skill level shows on live, so good on them. However, Black Mamba, I mean, these guys are veterans, even though they've had, you know, probably not the cleanest dungeon we've seen from them. We're seeing more of the bad side of their team. You know, maybe they knew that they were going up against this particular competition, so they didn't want to practice this first round as much. Maybe they're more practiced in the later rounds. But it's good enough to get through to the second round for them. So we see them engaging to Zala here, and of course, most dangerous part of the fight, that Deathly Roar is going to fear everyone for a couple seconds. But once you get through to Zala, the fight's pretty free.
I actually have to call out Black Mamba here a little bit, just because, you know, we talked about Pixel and them being the last seed, and their highest keys at plus 15 in time. So you know, they're actually showing up and they're doing well, considering, like, there's nothing to expect from that. Like, you don't expect them to do a 20-minute King's Rest, right, for Pixel side. But Black Mamba is one team we've been talking about a lot, and Black Mamba is a team that needs to show up if they want to get the points, if they want to qualify. They need to show up right now. They need to get the dungeons done. They need to get their execution done, which is something we've been talking about for so long about the team, just because the strategies are there. They have the strategies. They have everything that they need to get the dungeons done. They just don't execute the strategies very well. And last time around, they have been talking about their nerfs and just, you know, the complete new DPS roster that they got this time around in the summer season, you know, causing them to have some problems with nerfs, just being, you know, not being up to speed with their team synergy. But this is the second cup, and there's only 3, right? So at this point, they need to get everything together. They need to calm down. They need to have the head in the game, and they need to stop having those execution mistakes. This time around, it's going to be enough for Pixel, but in the next round, they need to show up. They need to not have those 18 deaths anymore.
Absolutely, and of course, King Desire down to 15% for Black Mamba, and I think it's all but said in this series. They're going to take this 2-0 and move on to the second round. But looking forward to who they're playing against, I feel like I believe they're playing against the winner of, let's see here, AAA and Big Money Crab. Big Money Crab is back in the tournament.
Big Money Crab!
I mean, looking at the way these teams played in the first Eastern Cup, AAA looked AAA was actually pretty similar to Black Mamba, where they had their really, really good dungeons and they looked really strong, and they had their poor dungeons where they actually looked pretty poor. So, yeah, like you said, Black Mamba's going to have to get it together if they have any chance of moving on further in this tournament.
Black Mamba does take the win, but as you mentioned, it starts highlighting some of the weaknesses for this pretty much newly reformed team as they take that King's Rest and seal that series 2-0. So Pixel had their struggles onto that one, Settles. Let's not try to hide away from that. They definitely did. But Black Mamba, this is one of those teams we're trying to see how they grow and how they can kind of match up to be a contender, and it wasn't as much as we would have liked.
I feel like we're having like deja vu. Didn't we have the same issue last week from Black Mamba too, where we described them as like falling upwards and like just making mistake after mistake, but they never get punished for it? Similar to something like we saw from Abracadabra last weekend in West Cup too, where it's like mistakes were made, but somehow they still end up eking out the win. Black Mamba here, it felt like versus Pixel, their strategies overall were just better, and they had way less deaths, like literally half as many deaths, like half as many wipes and stuff like that. But Black Mamba still, if they're playing versus a better team, it feels like they're going to get punished, especially for some of their interesting pathing choices that they actually ended up doing. Like that shroud across the whole entire bridge like we just saw on screen, it's a very good adaptation, and it's a very good if it's executed correctly. However, the trash that they pulled and the count that they were getting from some of the packs just ends up calling into question like the routing that they've actually chosen for King's Rest.
Yeah, and routing is an incredibly significant feature to look at in this dungeon. We saw with how those constructs get changed. Now that they're only focusing on those frontals on the tank alone. They're getting so much percentage out of that. But when you start skipping any of those, we run into a lot of routing issues, as you mentioned. And let's take a look into MDT on that.
Yeah, so one of those issues ends up occurring whenever you're actually on this bridge towards the end of the dungeon, where there's this pack with this Emissary of the Tides that you actually see in the middle, which makes all these mobs kick and CC immune because of its unstoppable cast. Basically, this pack has a Hex Priest and a Berserker in it, wherever the Berserker is. The Berserker's here. So it has a Hex Priest and a Berserker in it. The Hex Priest casts a Spectral Bolt, which groups most of the time will end up kicking. It will do a significant amount of damage to your tank and can actually be very deadly. That, coupled with this Berserker, which does this Severing Blade, also puts your tank survivability into question overall in the pull. And it makes this pull with this Emissary of the Tides very dangerous, and we can watch Black Mamba actually have a very close call on their tank death while they end up trying to nuke down this Emissary of the Tides. So they do this pull correct in terms of how they're dealing with it. They're making sure that the Tides dies first. They're making sure that they kill explosives and everything else. But overall, they shouldn't be pulling this pack, and we've seen very few teams over the course of the whole entire MDI pull this pack. Basically, this pack and that Brute are pretty much two no-pull packs, but for some reason, Wong ends up getting 2 stacks of the Berserker dot because you end up can't stunning it, plus the Hex Priest and the Witch Doctor are both casting on him, and it makes him drop so low. He doesn't end up going down, so they're able to salvage it, but it is a very questionable pull.
Well, you even noticed, I'm sorry, real quick note onto that, is you noticed that the stun from the Rogues, they had back-to-back stuns in the Tide Emissaries just before it died. So it had its entire channel and applied that second debuff.
But, I mean, it's just kind of weird that they're playing those 5 Night Elves because we haven't seen any, like, huge Shadow Melt skips, right?
You're right.
So maybe just having one Stone Form on one of the Rogues or even the tank, just getting the extra safety net of having the Stone Form to get rid of those bleeds, then it would have been totally fine, right?
I feel like there's no excuse for either of the Rogues to not be dwarfing.
Yeah.
Just being able to remove those bleeds is like super important. Yo, I want to take you out of your host element for a second here. What's the deal with Priest? Like, it seemed like it wasn't good enough to heal up the group for a lot of these situations.
Priest has been a little bit weird as we're looking at Pixel Axel's disc in one Zor. Some of the essence choices, trinket choices, and a little bit on the Azurite was pretty questionable. So when we're looking at essences, first round we saw, the Vitality Conduit major effect going into it. And the Vitality Conduit for healers, I don't think any healer has run it as a major in the MDI thus far. But the major's a 45-second cooldown. It takes health from other players, redirects it to the tank. It's actually pretty decent for King's Rest if you're pushing a high key, not for speed running, because it's all just single target pressure all the time. But when you start running it for that bursting affix in Borealis, well, you're taking health from one person, giving it to another, and all you're doing is just kind of equalizing a little bit, rather than Crucible of Flame, which we see everybody and their mother running with. You could even, if you wanted to, run a little more safe with like Vision of Major or Vision of Perfection Major, getting those Shadow Fiend procs out because your Shadow Fiend damage converts into Atonement. Because bursting in Borealis really isn't that bad because you always have something to hit. And once you constantly have something to hit, constantly have something to work off of, it'd work pretty well. But I think in a number of cases we found some of the routing issues, as Tettles had highlighted previously, but also how the tanks are able to stabilize some of the pulls were just making the life of the disc not too easy. And there was also some of the issues of how he was setting himself up.
And you say there's always something to hit, right? Because of the spotter that constantly stays alive?
Or the commanders.
Or the commanders, right? But they were actually just finishing them off. So they were like making the disc life actually even harder, right?
Yeah.
Because they were finishing off the spotter and doing those huge pulls without anything. And then I just saw the tank dying to the poison debuff and the bursting, and there was nothing alive because they finished off the spotter. So just seeing the disc priest like trying to keep him alive, but he couldn't really do anything.
I've been there.
Like
yeah, I've been there straight up. When you have that 5 stacks of the debuff on it to one of the mobs in, what is it, Deep Fathom's room, for example, you have to be able to get a stun or even a fear off to try to cancel those and beat back against it. That's just a massive problem. And that's part of how you build your composition as well, because then you start bringing Zyronics into your group and let's say, oh, how well are we able to extend the duration of bursting every single time?
Come on, guys, extend it. Come on. Oh, we dropped the stacks. Come on, guys.
It's kind of nice that you're playing back on NA now. I don't have to worry about that.
All right.
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to dig the knife in too far on that one. Well, we've taken a quick break to let Zyronic recover. The MDI will be back just after a little break. We'll be back. Whew.